In the summer of 1995, 15 people drove into Yellowstone National Park. None were ever seen again. Authorities blamed the wilderness, volcanic vents, animal attacks, unpredictable terrain. They said nature had simply reclaimed them, the way it sometimes does when humans venture too far into places not meant for us. But 30 years later, hikers found something that has rewritten everything we thought we knew about their disappearance. What if the park itself wasn't responsible? What if something else was? This is not just the story of what those hikers found beneath the ashen earth in 2025. This is about the warning signs that were always there, hidden in plain sight, forgotten in filing cabinets, and deliberately erased from memory. Ignoring those signs back then cost 15 lives. Ignoring them now might bury the truth forever. Yellowstone National Park, May 23, 1995. Sunset bleeds gold across the mountains as steam rises from distant geysers. The sky stretches endless above the pines. Nature's cathedral, indifferent to the small yellow school bus winding along its roads. Inside that bus, 13 high school seniors from Evercreek, Montana, laugh and jostle each other as the landscape rolls past their windows. Disposable cameras flash. Someone's portable CD player blasts Pearl Jam loud enough to echo through the cabin. Two chaperones, Mr. Leonard Howard and Mrs. Caro, exchange weary glances, but their smiles suggest indulgence rather than irritation. This is, after all, the senior trip, the last adventure before graduation, the moment these teenagers will remember forever. Among them sits Jacob Rhodes, gangly, confident, forever cracking jokes that make even stern Mrs. Caro laugh despite herself. His sister Emily wasn't here to see him go. She'd stayed behind to finish a journalism project that seemed so important at the time. Next to Jacob is Sarah Lively, the class president. Even now she's organizing something, passing around a notebook, encouraging everyone to write down their thoughts about the trip. For posterity, she says seriously, though her eyes sparkle with excitement. Who's even going to read this 20 years from now? Someone calls out. All of us, Sarah answers, when we have our class reunion. The notebook makes its way around the bus as Mr. Howard stands up at the front, gripping the metal bar of the seat beside him to steady himself against the rocking motion. Listen up, everyone, he says, his voice cutting through the chatter. The students quiet down immediately. Mr. Howard has that effect, a natural authority that commands respect without demanding it. There's been a slight change to our itinerary. He unfolds a park map, pointing to an area marked in green. Instead of the usual tourist spots, I've arranged special access to Cedar Basin. It's normally restricted, but I pulled some strings. You'll be the first student group to explore this area in years. Excited murmurs ripple through the bus. Mr. Howard smiles, his glasses reflecting the last rays of sunlight. This is cutting-edge geological research territory. Think of it as a preview of college-level field studies. No one questions why a high school science teacher has clearance for a restricted area. No one asks why the trip plan changed at the last minute. No one notices when Mr. Howard clicks off his walkie-talkie and slides it into his pocket. The bus continues down the winding road, leaving a thin trail of dust behind it. In 3 days, this same road will be filled with search vehicles, helicopters circling overhead, and rangers calling out names that will receive no answer. But tonight, there is only laughter echoing through the trees before fading into silence. At first, no one was worried, says former Evercreek High Principal Walter Jennings, now 83, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusts his glasses. School trips sometimes ran a bit behind schedule, service is spotty in the park. We expected a call saying they'd been delayed. That call never came. By the evening of May 25th, parents began phoning the school. By the morning of the 26th, the first report was filed with park rangers. By the 27th, search teams were deployed. The first thing we checked were the visitor centers and campgrounds, says retired Ranger Thomas McCall, who led the initial search effort. Standard procedure. Most missing hikers are just lost, not gone. But the Evercreek group wasn't at any campsite. Their bus wasn't in any parking lot. The visitor logs showed their entry into the park, but no exit. The Rangers expanded their search, combing hiking trails and scenic points. Nothing. It was like they drove into Yellowstone and vanished into thin air, McCall says, shaking his head. No trace, not even tire tracks after a certain point. The disappearance of 15 people, 13 teenagers, and 2 adults became national news within days. The FBI arrived. Volunteers poured in. Parents stood at the park entrance, hollow-eyed and desperate, holding photographs of smiling children who had boarded a bus and never returned. Search dogs followed scents that ended abruptly. Helicopters scanned terrain so rugged that ground teams couldn't access it. Divers explored lakes and rivers. The investigation expanded, contracted, and ultimately stalled. Theories emerged. Maybe they'd left the park boundaries. Maybe there had been a catastrophic accident in one of Yellowstone's remote thermal areas. Maybe they had encountered wildlife, though no one could explain how a bear or wolf could make 15 people and a school bus disappear without leaving evidence. Eventually, the search scaled back. The media attention drifted to newer tragedies. The families were left with hollow platitudes about the power of nature and the dangers of the wilderness. What no one could explain, says Emily Rhodes, now 44 and a journalist herself, was why so much information seemed to be missing. Trip itineraries that were incomplete, park records with pages torn out, and strangest of all, the missing radios. Every wilderness safety protocol begins with the same principle: maintain communication. In 1995, this meant walkie-talkies, especially in areas where cell service was non-existent. Evercreek High School knew this, which is why the school board had approved the purchase of 15 new two-way radios, specifically for the Yellowstone trip. I remember signing off on the purchase order myself, says Walter Jennings, flipping through photocopied documents from the school's archives. It was a significant expense, but safety was the priority. Yet according to school inventory records, those radios were returned to the equipment room the night before departure, still in their original packaging, never distributed to the students or chaperones. The signature on the return form, Leonard Howard. He said they were defective, recalls Marjorie Weston, the school secretary in 1995. Said he'd tested them that afternoon and they wouldn't hold a signal. He seemed agitated about it, which wasn't like him at all. Leonard was always so composed. Emily Rhodes sits at her kitchen table, documents spread before her, circling this detail with a red pen. The return of those radios should have been the first warning sign, she says, but no one questioned it. Not even when... She trails off, pulling another document from the pile, a receipt from Radio Shack dated May 20th, 1995, just 3 days before the trip. The purchase, a single high-powered two-way radio, significantly more advanced than the school-issued equipment. The buyer, Leonard Howard. He bought his own radio, Emily says quietly. Just one. Why would a teacher leading a group of students need a private communication channel? And more importantly, who was on the other end? When investigators later tried to access park radio logs from those days, they discovered another anomaly. The logs for May 23rd through May 25th were missing, replaced with a single sheet noting equipment malfunction. No transmissions recorded. That's not just convenient, says retired Detective Renee Vasquez, who joined the investigation in 1996 after similar disappearances in other national parks caught his attention. That's deliberate. Someone didn't want a record of whatever communications happened during those critical days. Further digging revealed something even more disturbing. Mrs. Caro, the second chaperone, had submitted her resignation letter 2 days before the trip, citing personal concerns about the excursion. Yet the morning of departure, she arrived at the school, resignation withdrawn, ready to accompany the students. She seemed different when she got on that bus, remembers the school janitor who helped load the equipment. Quiet. Kept looking at Howard like she was waiting for instructions. I figured they'd had some disagreement about the trip planning and patched it up. Whatever. Changed Mrs. Caro's mind died with her in Yellowstone. But her sister later told investigators that she had received a strange call the night before departure. She told me Howard had convinced her the trip was safe, but something in her voice, she didn't sound convinced. She sounded afraid. Real-life disappearances in national parks often share this common thread: communication links severed or compromised before tragedy strikes. In 1976, the Bennington Triangle hikers had removed the batteries from their emergency beacons the night before their disappearance. In 1988, the Johnson family had left their satellite radio at a ranger station minutes before heading into the area where they would vanish. When someone controls communication, Emily says, staring at the documents, they're controlling who can call for help, who can report problems, who can deviate from the planned narrative. She looks up, eyes hard with realization. Silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's the first line of disappearance. Cedar Basin Trail doesn't appear on any tourist map of Yellowstone. It's not mentioned in visitor guides or recommended by rangers. In fact, most official park maps from 1995 show the area as restricted, closed since 1990 for ecological restoration. So why was a school bus headed there? In the summer of 2025, Emily Rhodes and retired Detective Vasquez hike through overgrown brush, following the remnants of what was once a service road. Summer heat presses down through the trees, but the air here feels different, strangely still, as though the forest itself is holding its breath. According to the original investigation, search teams never checked this area thoroughly, Vasquez says, swatting at mosquitoes. They focused on the approved routes, the places tourists were supposed to go, not where they actually went. A rusted gate blocks the path, chain hanging loose from its frame. The sign, barely legible beneath decades of weather damage, reads, "Restricted area, authorized personnel only." Howard must have had a key, Emily says, examining the padlock, or someone let them through. Beyond the gate, the trail winds deeper into the forest, gradually transitioning from dirt path to the crumbling remains of an old paved road. Broken concrete peeks through moss and undergrowth, evidence of infrastructure far more substantial than a typical hiking trail. 2 miles in, Vasquez stops abruptly, pointing to something metallic, gleaming among fallen leaves. Emily kneels, brushing away debris to reveal a fragment of metal. "It's a license plate piece," she whispers, turning it over in her hands. The partial numbers visible, 04H955, match the school bus registration. "This shouldn't be here," Vasquez says, his voice tight with tension. The official search radius never extended this far. Someone wanted to make sure this area was overlooked. As they continue, the forest opens into a clearing unlike any natural formation in Yellowstone. The ground is unnaturally flat, covered in stunted vegetation that seems to struggle against the soil itself. At the center, a perfect circle of barren earth remains devoid of plant life, even after 30 years. "Thermal damage," Vasquez murmurs, crouching to examine the soil. "Look how it's fused at the edges, like glass." Emily takes photographs, her journalist's instincts battling with personal dread. "This wasn't on any official park map," she says, "but I found something in the archives." She unfolds a yellow document, a topographical survey from 1988, marked with Department of Energy letterhead. On it, this exact clearing is outlined in red, labeled Geotherm Subzone 05R, no civil access. "What was the Department of Energy doing in Yellowstone?" she asks. Vasquez's expression darkens. "The better question is, Why would a high school science teacher bring 13 students to a restricted energy research site? They discover a metal survey pin embedded in the ground at the clearing's edge, its cap stamped with a familiar logo, the Department of Energy's geometric symbol, alongside a numerical code matching the one on the map. Similar government research facilities existed across the American wilderness throughout the Cold War era and beyond. The Nevada test site's Area 21 conducted geothermal experiments under the guise of environmental research. After Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, Department of Energy personnel established monitoring stations that remained classified for decades. National parks aren't just wilderness preserves, Vasquez explains later, back in the safety of his home office. They're federal land, which makes them perfect locations for research that needs to stay hidden from public view. Miles of uninhabited terrain, restricted access, and a built-in explanation for keeping people away, preservation. He taps the topographical map, finger resting on the red outline. Cedar Basin wasn't closed to protect nature. It was closed to protect something else entirely. The question remains, did Mr. Howard lead his students to Cedar Basin by accident or by design? And if it was deliberate, why? The abandoned trailhead wasn't just a wrong turn, Emily concludes, her voice hollow with realization. It was a destination. Someone wanted them there. Every student on the Yellowstone trip carried a disposable camera. In 1995, before digital photography and smartphones, these yellow plastic cameras with their 27 exposures were how teenagers documented their adventures. After the disappearance, parents searched desperately for these cameras, hoping they might contain clues about their children's final days. None were ever found. Until now. It was in a storage box in the school basement, Emily explains, carefully handling a water-damaged cardboard carton labeled Class of '95 Trip Supplies. They were cleaning out old records and someone recognized my name on the contact list. They called me immediately. Inside the box, beneath faded permission slips and equipment inventories, lay a single disposable camera. The yellow plastic was discolored, the label partially peeled away. But the brand was still visible. Kodak, 27 exposures. The strange part, Emily continues, is that this camera was logged as returned to the school before the trip even began. According to this inventory, Mr. Howard collected all cameras for a pre-trip equipment check and returned this one as defective. Yet the counter on the camera showed 26 exposures used. Only one remained. Emily takes the camera to Northlight Photo, one of the few remaining film development labs in Montana. The technician, a gray-haired man named Robert, examines it with professional curiosity. Film degrades over time, he warns. After 30 years, I doubt we'll get anything usable, especially if it's been exposed to water or heat. But he tries anyway, carefully extracting the film and processing it through specialized chemical baths designed to salvage damaged negatives. 26 frames are indeed ruined, blackened completely, or dissolved into unrecognizable smears of color. But the final exposure, perhaps protected by its position at the end of the roll, yields a single, haunting image. The photograph shows a group of students standing on a ridge, their backs to the camera, looking out over a valley filled with rising steam. The landscape is bathed in an unnatural orange glow, not sunset, but something more concentrated, as though the light source were beneath the earth itself. The image is blurred, the edges warped by heat damage, and at the far right edge of the frame, partially cut off but unmistakable, a figure standing separate from the group, not a student. The proportions are wrong, taller, broader, wearing what appears to be an official uniform. It looks like a park ranger, Robert says, pointing to the distinctive outline of the hat. But why would they be in a restricted area? Emily takes the photograph to Vasquez, who examines it under a magnifying glass, his expression grim. "That's not a ranger," he says finally. "The uniform is similar, but look at the shoulder patch." He points to a barely visible insignia on the figure's jacket. Not the arrowhead symbol of the National Park Service, but a geometric design consistent with Department of Energy identification. Whoever this was, they weren't there to protect the students, Vasquez concludes. They were monitoring them. The true shock comes when Emily cross-references historical archives, searching for similar incidents in Yellowstone's past. In the University of Wyoming's special collections, she discovers a newspaper clipping from 1971. A brief mention of 4 hikers who disappeared in the same region. Attached to the article is a photograph nearly identical to the one from the recovered camera. The same ridge, the same steam-filled valley, the same strange orange glow, and at the edge, a similarly uniformed figure. "This wasn't random," Emily whispers, looking between the 2 images separated by 24 years. "This was a pattern." Throughout history, photographs have captured moments that later become evidence of tragedy. The last known image of the Dyatlov Pass hikers shows them smiling before their mysterious deaths in the Ural Mountains. The final vacation photos of the Jameson family revealed strange figures in the background weeks before they vanished in Oklahoma's Sam Bois Mountains. "A photograph isn't just an image," Emily says. "It's a moment preserved in chemical memory, sometimes capturing things we don't notice until it's too late." The recovered photo reveals something else, a timestamp embedded in the film edge, 05/24/95, 1620, the day after they entered the park, the day before they were due to return. They were alive and at Cedar Basin at least 24 hours into the trip, Vasquez notes. Whatever happened to them occurred after this photo was taken. What the image doesn't show, what no image could capture, is why a high school science teacher would lead his students to a location that had already swallowed visitors before, and why, 30 years later, someone tried to ensure this photograph would never be seen. When the hikers discovered the school bus remains in 2025, they noticed something peculiar about the excavation site. The ground was warm, unnaturally so for a spring morning in Yellowstone. "It wasn't just warm," says Liam Huxley, one of the hikers who made the discovery. "It was hot enough that our boots started to get uncomfortable, like standing on a heating vent." Initial surveys by park geologists attributed this to normal geothermal activity. Yellowstone sits atop one of the world's largest volcanic systems, after all. But as the excavation expanded, revealing more of the buried bus, and, eventually, human remains, the thermal readings became impossible to dismiss as natural. "The pattern was too precise," explains Dr. Mira Khanna, a retired geologist who specialized in geothermal energy research throughout the 1980s and 90s. "Natural heat vents are irregular, following the path of least resistance through rock layers. What we found at Cedar Basin was a perfectly cylindrical heat signature, almost like it came from an engineered source." Dr. Khanna's involvement wasn't coincidental. After seeing news reports of the discovery, she contacted investigators with information she had kept confidential for decades. Her own work at Cedar Basin as a Department of Energy contractor between 1988 and 1992. "I signed non-disclosure agreements," she admits, her hands trembling slightly as she speaks. "We all did. But I can't stay silent anymore. Not after they found those children." According to Dr. Khanna, Cedar Basin housed an experimental geothermal energy facility, part of a classified program studying heat extraction from Yellowstone's vast underwater reservoirs. The technology was promising, but unstable, utilizing deep earth drilling techniques to access superheated water and convert it to electricity. "The problem was containment," she explains. "The pressure at those depths is extraordinary. If a containment system failed, the release would be catastrophic." The project was officially shut down in 1990 after a series of concerning pressure fluctuations. The site was decommissioned, the access road closed, and the entire area designated as restricted to allow for environmental recovery, a convenient cover story that kept civilians away from potentially dangerous infrastructure. What makes no sense, Dr. Khanna continues, is why anyone would bring a school group there 5 years later. The monitoring systems were still in place. They had to be, to ensure nothing leaked. Someone would have known immediately if people entered that area. Emily obtains heavily redacted Department of Energy documents through Freedom of Information Act requests. Most details are blacked out, but one memo from March 1995, just 2 months before the Evercreek disappearance, mentions anomalous pressure readings at Site 05R and recommends continued remote monitoring. Another document, a personnel list from the original Basin Project, contains a name that stops Emily cold: Leonard Howard, Ph.D., not listed as a teacher or educator, but as a research consultant with background in thermal containment systems. He wasn't just a science teacher, Emily says, voice barely above a whisper. He worked for them? Further investigation reveals that Howard had joined Evercreek High School's faculty in 1993, 3 years after the Basin Project officially ended, but only months after receiving his teaching certification in a mid-career change that puzzled colleagues at the time. He was overqualified, remembers a former Evercreek administrator, PhD-level research experience, taking a job teaching high school science in rural Montana. We were thrilled to have him, of course, but it never made sense why he chose us. The answer may lie in a single line from his personnel file. Special project assignment, annual field research authorized. The school had granted Howard unusual freedom to conduct field trips and research excursions, a perfect cover for someone monitoring an abandoned research site. I don't think he intended to harm those students, Dr. Khanna says carefully, but I do think he used them, perhaps as unwitting assistants in some unauthorized monitoring activity, something he couldn't do alone without raising suspicions. The excavation at Cedar Basin eventually uncovers something else. Beneath the bus remains and several meters of soil, workers discover a damaged metal structure, the remnants of a containment vessel, its walls warped outward as if from immense internal pressure. Forensic analysis of the soil layers tells a chilling story, evidence of an explosive thermal event, temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, followed by rapid cooling and burial. The human remains show similar patterns of extreme heat exposure, though mercifully brief. Whatever happened here, Vasquez concludes, wasn't an accident in the traditional sense. The system was designed to contain that kind of pressure. Something, or someone, had to cause the failure. A final piece of evidence emerges from the archives, a recorded call between park officials and Department of Energy personnel on May 27, 1995, the day the official search for the missing students began. Though heavily degraded, the audio captures a chilling exchange. The situation at Basin is contained. Environmental factors will obscure any remaining evidence. And the civilians? Casualties of park hazards? Natural causes? The standard narrative. What about Howard? He was one of yours. No recovery possible. Same statement applies. The truth crystallizes with terrible clarity. The students and their chaperones weren't victims of nature's indifference. They were casualties of human negligence, bureaucratic secrecy, and a cover-up that spanned decades. The silence in the soil wasn't absence, Emily says. It was evidence deliberately buried. The earth doesn't forget. It preserves. And 30 years later, it decided to testify. Of all the artifacts recovered from Cedar Basin, none provides more direct insight into the final hours of the Evercreek students than a small, partially preserved notebook found beneath the bus remains. The pages are mostly destroyed, fused together by heat and time, but several fragments remain legible, protected by their position inside a student's metal pencil case. The handwriting belongs to Sarah Lively, the class president who had encouraged everyone to document their experiences for posterity. Her final entries, written over what appears to be a 36-hour period, tell a story of growing unease and dawning horror. First page, dated May 23, 1995, 8:47 p.m. Made it to Yellowstone. Mr. Howard says we're going somewhere special tomorrow, a research area that's normally off limits. Everyone's so excited. It feels like we're getting backstage access to the park's secrets. Jacob keeps making jokes about government conspiracies and aliens. If only he knew how annoying that gets after the 50th time. Next legible fragment, May 24th, 1995. Time unspecified. The restricted area is incredible, like nothing I've seen before. There's a huge clearing with all these strange metal structures underneath trapdoors in the ground. Mr. Howard says they're monitoring stations for geothermal activity. He's having us take soil temperature readings and record the data. Says it's valuable research experience, but honestly, it's pretty boring. Still, the view from the ridge is amazing. May 24th, 1995, 7:12 p.m. Something strange happened today. While we were taking readings, a man in a uniform arrived. He and Mr. Howard had a long conversation away from the group. They seemed to be arguing. When he came back, Mr. Howard said we were staying an extra night instead of returning to the main campground. Mrs. Caro looked really upset about it. May 24th, 1995, 11:30 p.m. Can't sleep. The ground feels weird, vibrating slightly, like there's machinery running underneath us. Jacob noticed it too. He tried to ask Mr. Howard about it, but got brushed off with some explanation about normal geothermal activity. I'm not so sure. Mrs. Caro keeps checking her watch and looking toward the road, like she's waiting for someone. Final entry, May 25th, 1995, 6:15 a.m. Something isn't right with Mr. Howard. He seems afraid. He's been on his radio all morning, talking quietly so we can't hear. The bus won't start. He says it's just a battery issue, but I think he's lying. We're stuck here until help comes. The ground is definitely getting warmer, and there's a hissing sound coming from those monitoring stations. I tried to look at the map, but it doesn't match what he told us about where we are. We're much deeper in the restricted zone than he claimed. I'm going to talk to Mrs. Caro. See if she'll tell me what's really... The entry ends mid-sentence. The pen stroke drags across the page as if Sarah's hand was jolted while writing. The remaining pages are charred beyond recognition. The timestamps align perfectly with what we know, says Vasquez, carefully examining the preserved notebook fragments under protective glass. The last radio transmission from anywhere near Cedar Basin was recorded at 6:22 a.m. on May 25th, just minutes after Sarah's final entry. After that, complete silence. Forensic analysis of the notebook reveals even more disturbing details. Trace elements of exotic metals, including alloys consistent with high-pressure containment systems, are embedded in the pages. And most telling, microscopic examination shows that the final pen stroke didn't simply trail off. It pressed through the paper with sudden, violent force. She was writing when it happened, Emily says, her voice breaking. Whatever it was. Perhaps most significant is what the notebook reveals about Mr. Howard. Far from being the villain of this story, Sarah's entries suggest he was increasingly concerned about their situation, possibly even attempting to warn someone via his private radio. I think Howard realized something was wrong with the containment system, Dr. Khanna hypothesizes. Perhaps that's why he brought the students there in the first place. He was supposed to check on anomalous readings, make some minor adjustments, a routine maintenance visit disguised as an educational field trip. But what he found was far more serious than anticipated. The conversation with the uniformed man, likely a Department of Energy supervisor, might have been about evacuation protocols. The extra night at Cedar Basin wasn't by choice but necessity. waiting for specialized equipment or personnel to address the growing crisis. By the time Howard understood the danger, Dr. Khanna continues, it was too late. The bus wouldn't start, possibly disabled deliberately to prevent them from leaving before the situation was contained. They were trapped. The notebook's final revelation comes not from what Sarah wrote, but from what she carried. Tucked into a hidden pocket in the notebook's cover, preserved by layers of melted plastic, investigators find a small key card, the type used for secure facility access. The card bears no identification except a numerical code, 0R7. That's not a student ID, Vasquez says. That's a Department of Energy access card, restricted clearance level. The question is, where did Sarah get it? The most likely answer emerges from the chaotic final hours at Cedar Basin. As the situation deteriorated, either Howard or Mrs. Caro gave Sarah the card, perhaps with instructions to try reaching a communication station or emergency exit. A desperate attempt to save at least one student that ultimately failed. The letter that never sent wasn't just Sarah's final words, Emily concludes. It was evidence that someone tried to help them, that someone recognized the danger and attempted to prevent the tragedy. But by then, the system was already failing. The countdown had already begun. Throughout history, last messages from disaster victims have provided crucial insights into what went wrong. The final radio transmissions from Amelia Earhart, the desperate telegraphs from the Titanic, the haunting cockpit recordings from doomed flights. These fragments of communication, cut short by catastrophe, tell stories that might otherwise remain buried forever. Sarah's notebook did what she intended, Emily says softly. It preserved their story for posterity. She just never imagined it would take 30 years for anyone to read it. The evidence uncovered at Cedar Basin triggers a seismic shift in the official narrative. What was once dismissed as a wilderness tragedy, 15 people lost to the unpredictable hazards of Yellowstone, is revealed as something far more sinister. A preventable disaster buried beneath layers of government secrecy and corporate negligence. Emily's investigation, initially driven by personal grief for her lost brother, expands into a comprehensive documentary exposing decades of deception. Government agencies issue carefully worded statements neither confirming nor denying the allegations. Department of Energy representatives describe the Cedar Basin facility as a decommissioned research site, but refuse to elaborate on its purpose or the events of 1995. But truth has momentum once unleashed. Former employees break silence, providing verification of details the government won't acknowledge. Classified documents mysteriously appear in Emily's mailbox, many heavily redacted, but enough to establish a timeline of catastrophic failure. Most significantly, a series of emails emerges from the personal effects of a deceased Department of Energy supervisor, communications dated between 1993 and 1995 that reveal the true nature of Leonard Howard's role at Ever Creek High School. Subject: Monitoring Protocol Update from Operations Director, Project Basin, to Howard L. Dr. Howard. Your position at the local school provides ideal cover for quarterly site inspections. The arrangement allows necessary monitoring without drawing attention to continued department interest in the basin facility. Standard readings only. No invasive procedures authorized. Containment systems remain in passive mode. Remember, your teaching position is your primary cover. Any activities that compromise this identity will result in immediate project termination. Another email, dated just 1 week before the fateful trip, shows escalating concern. Subject: Anomalous readings require verification. From Operations Director, Project Basin, to Howard L. Dr. Howard. Remote sensors indicate pressure fluctuations exceeding safety parameters at monitoring stations 3 and 7. Manual verification required immediately. Use academic excursion as cover if necessary, but readings must be confirmed within 72 hours. Maintenance team on standby pending your assessment. Critical. If readings exceed red line threshold, initiate protocol Sigma and evacuate immediately. The final email, dated May 24, 1995, the day before the disaster, was never opened. Subject: urgent. Evacuation order from Operations Director, Project Basin, to Howard, L. Dr. Howard. Satellite readings confirm critical failure imminent. Containment breach predicted within 12-24 hours. Extraction team dispatched to your location. Evacuate all personnel immediately. Repeat, do not attempt readings. Evacuate all personnel from basin perimeter. Acknowledge receipt of this communication ASAP. Howard never acknowledged the email. By the time it was sent, the school bus was already stranded with a mysteriously disabled engine. Cell service was non-existent. His personal radio, the one he'd purchased separately from the school equipment, was their only communication link. And someone had decided that link needed to be severed. He was set up, Vasquez concludes. Howard was sent to verify readings they already knew were dangerous. When he reported the severity of the situation, someone made a calculation. 15 lives against the exposure of a classified project and potential legal liability. The most damning evidence comes from an unlikely source, Richard Danton, the now elderly uniformed man Sarah mentioned in her notebook. Tracked down by Emily to a retirement community in Arizona, he initially denies any knowledge of Cedar Basin or the Ever Creek incident. But when confronted with the evidence, particularly Sarah's notebook entries describing his argument with Howard, his composure crumbles. "I told them to get those kids out," he says, voice cracking with 3 decades of suppressed guilt. "I drove out there as soon as I saw the readings. Howard was trying, but by then it was too late. The bus wouldn't start. Sabotage, though, he didn't know it then. Someone at operations had remotely disabled the vehicle to prevent unauthorized departure." Danton explains that he'd gone to arrange emergency evacuation, helicopters that could remove the students before catastrophic failure. But when he called in the request, he was ordered to stand down. "They told me the situation was being handled through alternate channels. When I pressed for details, they threatened my career, my pension, my family's security clearance. By the time I realized what alternate channels meant, containing the situation by containing the witnesses, it was too late. The system had already failed." The official cover-up was comprehensive. Park records altered, search areas misdirected, evidence removed, witnesses silenced through confidentiality agreements and veiled threats. A convenient narrative established. Tragic accident, unpredictable wilderness. Nature's power beyond human control. "It wasn't the park that killed those children," Emily states in her documentary's most powerful moment. "It was human calculation. Someone decided their lives were an acceptable loss to protect government secrets." Howard himself left one final piece of evidence, a journal found among his effects at a storage facility, its existence unknown until a missed payment led to the contents being auctioned. Among personal items and academic papers was a leather-bound notebook containing his private thoughts about the Basin Project and his role at Ever Creek High. The final entry, dated May 24, 1995, the night before the disaster, reads, "The readings are beyond anything anticipated in the safety protocols. Something is fundamentally wrong with the containment system. This isn't a minor fluctuation, it's systemic failure. I've reported the critical values, but operations keeps delaying evacuation authorization. The students don't understand the danger. How could they? I've maintained cover as instructed, presenting this as an exciting research opportunity. Sarah is suspicious, too observant for her own good. She's noticed the discrepancies in the maps, the strange behavior of the monitoring equipment. The bus won't start, convenient timing that raises too many questions I can't answer. The radio frequencies are jammed except for the emergency channel, which operations monitors. They keep promising an extraction team by morning, but I fear they're stalling. If anyone finds this, know that I tried to get them out. Whatever they tell you afterward, whatever story they construct about wilderness accidents or getting lost, it's a lie. We're here because I brought them here, following orders I should have questioned. Their blood is on my hands, but it's also on the hands of those who knew the danger and chose silence over safety. The entry ends there. Howard's final testament before the containment system failed catastrophically the following morning, releasing superheated steam and gases that would have killed everyone at the site within seconds. Emily's documentary, titled The Class Trip to Yellowstone Vanished, premieres to international attention and immediate controversy. Government agencies issue carefully worded denials. Former officials cite national security concerns. Legal threats arrive at her publisher's offices. But the truth has already escaped. Like steam from a failing containment vessel, impossible to recapture once released. In the summer of 2026, 1 year after the discovery that shattered decades of silence, Cedar Basin is transformed. The excavation site, once hidden behind temporary barriers and official tape, is now a solemn memorial. A modest stone marker lists 15 names, 13 students, and 2 adults who entered Yellowstone and never returned. The site's official designation has changed as well. No longer a restricted research area, it is now Evercreek Hollow, a recognized historical location within Yellowstone's boundaries. Its tragic history acknowledged, rather than concealed. Families who spent decades wondering about their children's fate now have answers, though not the ones they hoped for. Many have found a measure of peace in finally knowing the truth, however painful. Others remain angry at the systematic deception that buried their loved ones' stories beneath layers of bureaucratic silence. It doesn't bring Jacob back, Emily says, standing beside the memorial on the anniversary of the discovery. Nothing can do that. But at least now when people ask what happened to him, I can tell them the truth. Not some convenient story about getting lost in the wilderness, but the real story about people who valued secrecy more than children's lives. The legal and political aftermath continues to unfold. Congressional hearings examine the Department of Energy's handling of the incident and subsequent cover-up. Several former officials face criminal charges for their roles in concealing evidence and obstructing the original investigation. Class action lawsuits seek damages for the families, though no financial compensation can address their decades of uncertainty and grief. The broader impact extends beyond Cedar Basin. The revelation of government deception in the Evercreek case prompts reviews of other mysterious disappearances in national parks, cases previously attributed to natural hazards or human error that may hide more complex truths. For Detective Vasquez, the resolution brings both vindication and exhaustion. The case that defined the latter half of his career is finally closed, though not as he once imagined. I always thought we were looking for a criminal, he admits. Someone who took those kids, hurt them, hid the evidence. Turns out, we were looking for a system. A web of decisions and protocols that valued certain kinds of safety over others. That's harder to put handcuffs on. Vasquez retires fully after the investigation concludes, his health declining rapidly in the months that follow. Before his death in early 2027, he leaves Emily a single note. We were both searching for ghosts. Turns out they were searching for us too. Dr. Mira Khanna continues her advocacy work, pushing for greater transparency in government research conducted on public lands. Her testimony before congressional committees leads to new legislation requiring stricter safety protocols and civilian oversight for potentially hazardous projects, even classified ones. No scientific advancement is worth 15 lives, she testifies. The tragedy at Cedar Basin wasn't just a containment failure, it was a failure of basic human ethics. Richard Danton, The Department of Energy supervisor who tried to arrange evacuation receives limited immunity in exchange for his comprehensive testimony about the events leading up to the disaster and subsequent cover-up. Though legally protected, he faces his own personal reckoning with 3 decades of silence. "I told myself I was following orders," he says during one particularly emotional interview, "that my hands were tied. But I could have done more, should have done more. Those kids might be alive today if I'd had the courage to speak up sooner." For the small town of Evercreek, the revelations bring a complex mixture of grief and healing. The community that lost a generation of its children now understands the truth behind that loss. A painful knowledge, but one that allows for proper mourning after decades of uncertainty. The high school establishes a memorial scholarship in honor of the lost class of 1995. The yearbook, which had left their senior photos bordered in black with no explanation beyond "gone too soon," is reissued with a special section acknowledging the truth of their fate. Perhaps most significantly, the reexamine, the recovery effort at Cedar Basin continues, working carefully to identify and return remains to families for proper burial. Though the catastrophic nature of the containment failure left little intact, modern forensic techniques allow for identification of most victims, providing closure for families who had no graves to visit for 30 years. Sarah Lively's notebook, carefully preserved and digitally reconstructed, becomes part of the Smithsonian's collection on American tragedies and cover-ups, her voice ensuring that the truth she tried to document will never again be buried. For Emily Rhodes, the journey that began with her brother's disappearance transforms into a new mission. She establishes the Yellowstone Truth Project, an organization dedicated to investigating other unexplained disappearances in national parks and advocating for greater transparency in how such cases are handled. "The wilderness is dangerous enough without adding human deception to the equation," she explains. "When someone vanishes in our national parks, families deserve the unvarnished truth, not convenient narratives that protect institutions at the expense of closure." On the anniversary of the Cedar Basin discovery, Emily stands at the memorial as the sun sets over Yellowstone. The landscape remains as beautiful as it is indifferent. Steam rising from distant geysers, mountains glowing gold in the fading light. Nature has already begun reclaiming the excavation site, grass and wildflowers pushing through disturbed soil. "The earth doesn't hold grudges," she reflects. "It buries our secrets but eventually returns them when the time is right." 30 years was a long time to wait for truth, but the mountain's patience outlasted their silence. As darkness falls, Emily places a single photograph at the base of the memorial, the recovered image showing students at the ridge, looking out over what would become their final resting place. A moment frozen in time before tragedy struck, preserved through decades of deliberate forgetting. "The forest keeps its secrets," she says softly, "until it decides the world has earned them." Between 1990 and 2024, over 1,600 people disappeared in U.S. national parks without resolution. Most are never found. Some vanish in perfect weather on well-marked trails. Others leave behind belongings arranged in ways that defy explanation. Many disappear in areas they know intimately, having hiked or camped there dozens of times before. Official explanations cite the power of wilderness, its vast spaces, unpredictable terrain, and natural hazards. These explanations are often correct. Nature doesn't need malice to be dangerous. Indifference is enough. But sometimes, as Cedar Basin proved, there are other forces at work. Human factors that remain hidden behind convenient narratives about getting lost or falling victim to exposure, wild animals, or accidents. The 15 people who boarded a school bus to Yellowstone in May 1995 couldn't have known they were entering more than a national park. They were stepping into a convergence of institutional secrecy, scientific hubris, and catastrophic failure, a perfect storm of human factors more deadly than any natural disaster. The warning signs were there from the beginning: communication channels severed, routes diverted, evidence removed, whistleblowers silenced. Each sign alone might seem insignificant: a changed itinerary, returned equipment, a restricted trail. Together they formed a pattern that might have saved lives had anyone recognized it in time. These patterns exist in other disappearances too, threads of inconsistency running through official explanations, details that don't quite align with established narratives. Not every missing hiker is victim to a cover-up, of course. But when the story feels too neat, when evidence vanishes too conveniently, when authorities discourage certain questions, those are moments that demand closer scrutiny. If the Evercreek case teaches us anything, it's that truth may take decades to surface, but it never truly disappears. Like the artifacts at Cedar Basin, it waits beneath layers of deliberate forgetting, preserved in unexpected ways: a photograph, a notebook fragment, a witness who finally breaks silence. The wilderness itself becomes both vault and witness, indifferent to human deception, yet ultimately revealing what humans tried to hide. The Earth, given enough time, returns everything entrusted to it, including truth. If you've ever felt something wasn't right, a story that didn't add up, an explanation that left too many questions unanswered, trust that instinct. Look closer, ask uncomfortable questions. The most important details are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to recognize their significance before they fade into history. Sometimes a single overlooked warning sign is all that separates safety from tragedy. Sometimes a single persistent question is all that stands between buried truth and justice. The class trip to Yellowstone vanished on May 25, 1995. 30 summers later, hikers found something that rewrote their story. Not just rusted metal and weathered bones, but evidence of a truth too long denied. A reminder that the most dangerous predators in our wilderness are sometimes the ones who control the narrative afterward. Listen when the forest whispers names. It isn't wind, it's memory.